And I'd like to begin by asking Pastor Wes Spike, who's the chaplain for the West Michigan Veteran Affairs, to come up and please give us the invocation.
I work as a chaplain down at West Michigan Veterans Inc., and my wife and myself, work with veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's not something that's looked at today. It seems to be the buzzword today with veterans. And we're working a lot with our younger vets that are coming back. My wife works with their wives who actually have secondary post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of them. So anyway, I'm not new to post-traumatic stress, and I was a gunner on a river patrol boat in Vietnam in '69 and '70, and I suffer from it as well. But hopefully, with care, understanding, these guys can come back. Now, that being said, I am so grateful for our medical staff that were not only corpsmen and medics, but their secondary care as they came back into the field hospitals and everything, where it would be the nurses, the doctors. So with that, I was asked to recite a prayer of an Army nurse. And in conclusion of that, I'll do a prayer as well. This is the prayer of an Army nurse. Hear my prayer in silence before thee as I ask for courage each day. Grant that I may be worthy of the sacred pledge of my profession and the lives of those entrusted to my care. Help me to offer hope and cheer in the hearts of men in my country, for their faith inspires me to give the world and nursing my best. Instill in me the understanding and compassion of those who led the way, for I am thankful to you for giving me this life to live. Let's pray. Father, we could never thank our medical and military men and women enough for their courageous service and sacrifice to our country. Today, we lift up our voices to express gratitude and honor to all of them, both from the past and present. Let us remember those with us here today, those presently serving this great country, and may we never forget those who have sacrificed their lives for so many. Keep and protect these heroes and their families. Keep those that are veterans and those presently serving physically safe and in good health. Guard them and protect them from harm, and be a shield around each one. On our behalf, O Lord, many of our medical military entered into danger, endured separation from those they loved, labored long hours, and faced hardship in war and in peace as they served others so faithfully. We ask that you would lift up all of our military nurses that are currently serving or have served. May you encourage and heal those that have been suffering from both visible and invisible wounds. Guard those in need and embrace them with your grace. Oh, Father, we thank you for all of these precious lives. Bless them with your love and mercy. In Jesus' name, amen.
Here comes our fantastic curator who has been so busy working on this exhibit, collecting items, working with Bill Jacobs, who you will hear from shortly. So I'm going to turn it over to Peg Maniotis.
It's my pleasure tonight to talk to you a little bit about how the exhibit came to be. The exhibit came to be because one of our wonderful volunteers had come up with an idea and said maybe it would be nice to do an exhibit of women in the military, of those people that are there that serve. They're so seldom ever heard from, and so seldom their stories are ever told. And this started well over a year ago, possibly 18 months ago. And Bill Jacobs, a wonderful volunteer here that we have, started doing research into the nurses here in Muskegon that served during World War II. If you look in your program, you can see some of the names of the nurses that he found, all the names he found. We tried to include absolutely everyone that served as a nurse, and there's a lot of other people that served as well that were in the cadet corps and different things like that. But that number just got to be too large to include. And so what we wanted to do was to keep it very narrowly focused so that we could do the best job we could explaining what their lives were like. And one of the things that we noticed when we were doing it is that the conditions that they worked under were very, very strenuous and very difficult. But if you look at all of the posters that are out there for early part of the war, or you look at any of the newsreels very early in the war, they paint a completely different picture. The newsreels show that nursing is just some glamorous job when you're going to go out and you're going to have a grand old time traveling the world. When you take your first walk through the exhibit, take a moment and stop by and look at the posters there. And look at what's there when they say, you know, we want nurses to come and work for us. What you're going to see here is part of a newsreel. And it's going to show you what they were trying to produce and to show people in order to get them to join the nursing corps.
More troops for the American Expeditionary Force in Australia. Armed convoys winning the game of hide-and-seek with enemy fleets to deliver the men and material to the land down under. Girls of the Army Nurses Corps, American women going to war fronts around the globe with the men. Here is a Japanese flyer rescued from the Pacific by an American sergeant whose own plane made a forced landing on the sea. The Jap was floating nearby in the wreckage of his Zero fighter. The sergeant took him in tow, and both were picked up by a passing transport. Once ashore, the Army nurses make themselves right at home in this strange new world. At an advanced base, they take over a completely equipped hospital and dressing station. Overnight, medical and surgical facilities are established to care for the physical needs of the troops. The girls, all rated as officers and trained to rigorous Army standards, work long hours. But it's not all grim. At the local zoo, they meet Australia's famous koala bears, seldom seen outside the continent. And Mr. Kangaroo jumps at the chance to meet some pretty American girls.
I cut it there for the reason that this is, you know, the newsreels were the primary way. They're before the ability to show on the 6 o'clock evening news what was going on. And this is where so many people got their information from. And what they portrayed it as was so very different than what the reality of the nursing corps was at this point. And when you take a moment, we're going to take a look at some of the posters that are hanging up along the wall there. This is an early Navy recruitment poster for nurses. Everything is so pristine. It looks, everything is perfect. And this is what they're trying to say, you know, and become part of us. It's a very beautiful profession, which it is, but it doesn't show any of the negative sides whatsoever. We have another glamour shot of the nurses and how they look and what they're projecting their to be. And you're thinking, well, what is the propaganda part that they're trying to talk a little bit about? What is it that they're trying? Are they just going out and recruiting? Are they just, what is their purpose in doing this? And as the war continues on, you start seeing a little bit of change in the backgrounds. It's, you know, yes, she's still pristine and white, and her uniform is crisp, and everything about it is perfect, but the background has changed a little bit. And as we're progressing more and more into the war, the posters change and the propaganda. Then you take a look at this poster. She looks like she's a little stressed out. She looks like there is a lot to do. If you look at what her IV there for her soldier is hanging on, it's no longer her dressed in her pristine white uniform. She's now in a military uniform. The surgical, the IV that she's hanging there is on a gun. It's completely changed. And this is by the time we get to 1944. This poster speaks for itself. It's the whole changing attitude of what they were doing to recruit at this point. In the beginning of the war, it was called, it's your honor, it's your service, it's your duty, it's going to be a wonderful thing. But as you can see from the way that the war is progressing and things are changing, it's a completely different fleet. And so as you see, the time changes. So when you first walk into the exhibit, take a moment and spend a moment looking at each of those different posters and say, you know, Women wanted to volunteer. Women wanted to do their part during World War II. And women wanted the aspect of being able to help. And this is just one of the many ways that they were able to do it. But take a look at how the propaganda worked. Take a look at how they were recruited and how it changed over the course of the war. Bill is going to talk to you a little bit more about the whole history of nursing during World War II. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all those people that made this exhibit possible. There's been a lot. As I said, Bill Jacobs has been wonderful doing research. Don Kitchen has been an extraordinary assistant in doing so much of the prep work in doing the exhibit. Tom Trencher has helped with fabricating the exhibit. We have so many of the staff members here have been so busy. Teresa has been responsible for everything that you see here, all of the wonderful things. Denise has been responsible for keeping us all going. Frank has been out there doing marketing, and Russ has been out there doing his best, enjoying the warm weather while we're here. And Sue Strum is the one that's been responsible for the program and the brochures. And our museum would not be the way it is without all of the wonderful help that we get from all of our volunteers. We have a very small staff, and if it wasn't for all the extraordinary volunteers that come here and help us, that we would not be the place that we are. We cannot neglect to thank, though, also our board of directors, because without them providing us the vision and the foundation, we would not be able to do what we do. And then we have to go back even further and thank all those submariners who took the time and the effort to realize that the Silversides was such an important vessel and took their time 40, 50 years ago to make sure that she was preserved. And without her being here, none of the rest of this would have happened. And without all of those gentlemen, all those years ago, none of this would have happened. So we have to say a thank you to all of them when she was in Chicago and people took care of her, made sure she didn't get scrapped. So that is so very important. Also, this doesn't happen without donations. And we've been very lucky to have several very good donations to our exhibit. The Osteopathic Foundation has been very generous to us, and Mercy Health, as well as many of the artifacts that you're seeing in the exhibit this evening have been loaned to us from other institutions and donated by family members. And so please look in the program from all the different people that have donated items to the exhibit. So thank you all for coming out tonight, and we appreciate having you here, because this wouldn't be possible without everyone that came out here tonight. So thank you.
We have two very special guests tonight. Ruth A. Lundy Shamira, Captain, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, 1941 to 1946. Ms. Shamira, would you please stand? And over at this table, Ann M. Tardani, Marinelli, Second Lieutenant, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, 1945 to 46. Would you please stand? You grace us with your presence for this exhibit, and like we've had other guests and other visitors, other veterans who have been with us, this being the first one for which we've had women, thank you for being here. Now, I've asked both ladies if they would be willing to say something. Now, Ms. Shamira told me no in certain terms, I do not do public speaking, and so I just said, okay. But she said, my daughter will.
She said, just like the title of this program says, I didn't do anything. Several years ago, Roosevelt Park has their annual summer parade, and they wanted a female from World War II to be the Grand Marshal of the parade. And my mom told them no. So then my sister and I heard about it, and we said, Mom, you are going to do that. And she said, well, I didn't do anything in the war. Why do they want me? And the same with the program out at the college last week. So I didn't do anything. So this is very appropriately named, but we know that the nurses all did a lot. And this is my mom's uniform from the war, which she is generously going to donate to the Silversides Museum. And this is a friend of our family's, Ashley Arnott. She is a student out at MCC and a friend of the family's, and the only one we know small enough to fit in that uniform. And it looks like the nurses were small back then. Ann is tiny, my mom is tiny, and yeah, gosh. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my mom. She is a graduate from the Mercy School of Nursing, and on December 7th, she and a couple of friends of hers were working the night shift and heard the news about the war, and the next morning, she and a couple of her friends went down to the post office, and they were the first ones there to sign up to join the war. And I'll put my glasses on. So she first she was sent to Scott Field for 2 years, where she went in, as they said, as an officer, second lieutenant, and then from Scott Field went to Fort Hood, Texas, and in both these places she worked in the hospital. And it was after Fort Hood that she was assigned to go to India. It took over a week to get to India. The planes weren't like they are today. You didn't hop in and get, halfway around the world in a few hours. First, they left from New York City and went to Greenland, and then to Azores, and then to North Africa, and then to Egypt, and then to Persia, and then got to New Delhi, where she stayed for the rest of the war. There was a barracks there. It wasn't a battlefield, or a battle zone, she said, but there was a lot of malaria. She did take care of 2 generals, she said. Some of you may have heard of General Curtis LeMay and also General Brown. They were both in at, I guess there's no HIPAA violation anymore, so they were both in with pneumonia, and my mom took care of them. She said that, I asked her how she got to become a captain, and she said, well, I was just in so long that they made me one, but I'm sure that's not quite true. She must have done something special. And let's see, what else did she say? The war ended in August, and the nurses weren't able to leave right away. She had to stay until December, and then she came home and got back to Muskegon on Christmas Eve. So the family, I'm sure, had a wonderful Christmas. And they had told my mom when she signed up for the war that she would be enlisted for 1 year. But the 1 year came, and she said that there was no choice, that the nurses had to stay in, and her 1 year turned into 5. So, but we're very proud of my mom. We're proud to be here tonight and have her be part of all these World War II exhibits. And even though all the nurses think that they didn't do anything during the war, everybody played a critical role, no matter what their service was. And as a family, we're so proud of her, and we've definitely learned to be proud of our flag and honor the military, and we'll just always cherish these memories, and we'll look forward to seeing her picture every time we come down here. So, thank you very much for being here. Brent asked me to share a story that my mom shared with us on the way here tonight. I was reading about the CBI and theater, and it said that the women had to wear special clothing at night because of the mosquitoes and getting the malaria. And my mom said, well, we didn't have to do that, she said, but we did have to wear boots in the evening after 7 o'clock. They had to wear high boots, and we said, well, why did you have to wear boots? And she had said, because of the snakes. There were so many snakes there that they had to wear boots, and actually one of the people who was standing on patrol or something one night in the morning was no longer because it got a snake bite and passed away from it. So, yeah, she had to wear her high boots.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for wearing your boots, makes that you're here tonight. But I hope you're wearing boots for what we have over here, but don't worry about snakes, that won't be a problem. Ms. Marinelli, would you like to come up and say a few words, or I'm sure there's going to be some questions popping here, would you? A very few words. A very few words, okay.
It should stay. Go ahead, I'll stand by. Okay. I just want to remember the four nurses that I entered. Very close. I went in with Louise Blaze, Alice Buckley, and Verna Creek. And we signed up together. We've been in training together. We sailed together, and we ended up on Saipan. And then after we arrived there, Verna and I stayed on Saipan, and Alice and Molly were over the flying. And I only had one opportunity to see them at that time. And then I came back to Saipan. My brother was there. And well, then shortly after that, I went in late in 1943. And so by the time we got into the war was almost over. So when we came home in 1944, I got home in 1945. But it was a good experience, and I hold certain memories of it.
We are honored by your presence. As many of the veterans as we meet out here, you just detect their humility. That what they did was not that big of a deal. They were supporting this country. God bless you all. Bill Jacobs is a professor of history, retired from Muskegon Community College. I'm honored that he's here and he's volunteering here. He and I worked together many years at community college. Historian supreme, and you give him a topic and he researches it to the nth degree. So he has about a 3-hour presentation that he will, no, I'm kidding. Bill Jacobs, please come forth. He will be sharing some insight and other stories about this exhibit and the research he did, and he did research.
Welcome everyone, I'm glad you're here to see this exhibit. It truly is a wonderful piece of opportunity because nobody else in the United States has done this. We are the first to do this kind of an exhibit, and we're very proud of it, so I'm pleased that you're here to see it. The exhibit is quite thorough, so I'm going to just give you a context of what it's all about this evening. Before I do that, I would like to mention that we have some books in our gift shop. Did that go out? There it is. This is one, it is part of the official military history of the United States. It's on the CBI. It's quite thorough if you're interested in that. This is a contemporary history of the Army Nurse Corps. There's a shorter version of it, which is a commemorative pamphlet about nurses in World War II in the Army Nurse Corps, if you're interested in that. That's also for sale. There is another piece here. This is the Army Corps, for Women's Army Corps from 1945 and 1978. So there's some things there that you can purchase. There are also posters and maps and things, if you're interested in that, for sale down there. So with that said, let me begin. As everybody's pointed out, the nurses who served in World War II, as I was reading their memoirs, the same phrase came up over and over and over again. We didn't do anything. In fact, if you look at the exhibit, you'll see they did quite a bit. So this is called From Pearl Harbor to Iwo Jima. Context in which this had to work. You must remember that the military really didn't quite know what to do with their nurses. And I think that was evident in the uniform problems they had from 1941 to 43. One nurse said they had one sock and it was too big. And they had another sock that was even bigger. So that the structure of operations here was based on a threefold kind of idea. First, field hospitals, which were frontline hospitals receiving patients right from the battlefield, and here some detail about it. First of all, these are the women who waded ashore with the troops. There was no special treatment. There was no concern for them beyond the fact that they were soldiers like everybody else. So they went ashore in the Navy's boats, in the Army's boats, and with full packs, and often under fire. The number of nurses is small. The key point was triage. What to do with the wounded who came in. What were the wounds, what was the status, how quickly could they be moved, and what kind of treatment they needed at the moment. The interesting thing about this, and you'll see it over and over again, is the survival rate. With the field hospitals, just think of that, doing 80 operations a day. Hackley does what? Maybe a dozen operations in a daytime? Okay. Here we're talking about 80 operations with some 85% survivability. So that's quite high. Overall, as you'll see, the number of men who were wounded, the survival rate was quite good, 4%, which is pretty good. The next step was the evacuation hospital. From the field hospital, immediate treatment, and then to an evacuation hospital for more extensive treatment where post-operative care would take place. And again, it depended on the extent of the wound that they had before transportation. Then to station and general hospitals. Station and general hospitals were formed to the rear and in peaceful areas, many of them in the United States, the general hospitals. And as you can see here, the basic idea is long-term care. Transportation took place in three forms: trains, hospital ships, and planes. All of those were dangerous. Of the three, the most dangerous were the hospital ships. 3 of them were bombed during the war, and nurses died as a result of that. Something you may not know about was air evacuation. Air evacuation was very dangerous because air pressure changes as you ascend into higher elevations. That means wounds can open. In addition to that, there are the difficulty of what were then called the battle fatigue or battle shock patients, what we call post-traumatic stress patients today. Those patients had to be restrained and often medicated because if they weren't, it could cause problems in flight for them and for the other patients. So the nurse in an airplane dealing with the wounded had to general surveil the patients that were there, had to treat any emergencies that might arise, and to keep track of the possibility of any disorder. Sometimes prisoners of war were also transported in the same planes with the wounded, and that caused some severe problems. One nurse finally said happened to be English soldiers who were wounded, it was getting quite tense, and the English patients were thinking of, well, let's just throw them out the door, out the window. And the nurse said, hey, wait a minute, these men were soldiers too, and that made a difference to the wounded. That calmed them down. But it demonstrates the point that the nurse had to be aware not only of medical conditions, but of the environment in which she was working. The air evacuation was quite successful. As you can see there, 46 patients died out of over 1 million. That's a pretty good record, unfortunately, not for the 46. One time there are unexpected events. This happened, this little reference here, happened in the Pacific. The plane went down because they didn't have enough fuel, and it went down on an island, and one of the patients had a severed windpipe. I don't know how this happened. It was described, not pictured, but the nurse used breathing tube from a syringe, colonic tubes, and tubes from a life jacket in order to get the man to breathe. That's a pretty innovative solution. I certainly wouldn't have thought of that. And I'm not sure many people would, but that's what was happening in air transport. So that the structure of operations provided an organizational context in which nurses could then operate successfully. And they did. Additional training also improved organization of the nursing corps. Nurses, of course, had to be trained in military procedure simply because you're dealing with a multi-million man organization, and moving people around quickly under dangerous circumstances had to be done in a way that was efficient and saved lives, and that's certainly in part what that training did. There's also some funny parts. One nurse said the other day, I got 3 demerits for something my boots did. At any rate, it was a shock for them to come into that kind of training as civilians. You must remember, we're talking about professional people here. These were not just anybody. These were women who had very specific skills. In addition, nurses were trained in anesthesiology because doctors were needed for other kinds of things, so that activity was delegated to nurses. Psychiatric nursing, because 1 out of every 12 patients required some sort of psychiatric treatment as a result of the war. Finally, something we didn't include in the exhibit, the Cadet Nursing Corps. We didn't include it because it's just too big. We limited this to the Army Nursing Corps, the exhibit itself, but the Cadet Corps was created to supply nurses on the domestic front, the zone of the interior, where nurses served in civilian hospitals for the most part, but sometimes in medical or military hospitals. They landed with the troops in Normandy and were moving across Europe with them. So they had to be able to set up the evacuation hospitals, the field hospitals, and move them on a moment's notice, and then set them up someplace else. Field hospitals were also difficult because often they were places occupied formerly by the enemy in ill repair. In North Africa, one unit encountered after landing a hospital they had to create, had no electricity, no water, and no beds. Imagine having to cope with all of that, as well as wounded all at the same time. The 12th moved 11 times in 2 years, as Bellafere, who's the author of this little pamphlet, pointed out. The point being that those skills learned in military training, professional skills from nursing school, and simple common sense that exerts itself under the influence of emergency all came together in a nice little package that worked. Many of the men who encountered nurses initially weren't sure that they could perform under the conditions of the field, and in fact, they not only performed, they performed very well. So it worked. It worked in the Pacific as well. Nurses served all over the Pacific: New Zealand, Fiji Islands, New Caledonia, the Hebrides, as well as New Guinea, Guadalcanal, Saipan, Guam, Tinian, and other places in the South Pacific, in field hospitals. The Pacific was different from Europe because of infectious diseases, much more common in the Pacific theater than in the European theater. And some of that took long-term care. One thing called a disease that's encountered from mites and takes a lot of care to get rid of. So it took a lot of labor. In addition to that, there are the problems of security. We are, of course, talking about young men overseas who haven't seen many women for a long time. And nurses, of course, were attractive targets, so to speak. So General MacArthur said, it's better to be safe than sorry, so let's guard them. So they did. Nurses in the Pacific were often under guard, couldn't go out alone, had to have a guard when they went out alone, and the nurses' quarters were often off limits. And as a result of that, or because of the discipline of the men themselves, no incidents occurred, fortunately. It worked in the Pacific as well. These are just some examples here. In January of 1943, there were 14,000 some American troops, almost 9,000 contracted some form of disease, malaria being the most common, especially in the CBI theater. Malaria on the front lines of the CBI was often debilitating. As much as 84% of the men who served there contracted malaria. So that required special care, someone mentioned special uniforms. They're quite hot. India is, the temperature is often equivalent to the humidity, so it is quite hot to have to wear those things, and not everybody did. The other part of that was to take Atabrine. Atabrine turned the skin kind of yellow-green, so many nurses said, I'm just not going to take this, and fortunately they didn't contract malaria. The rate went down as a result of those procedures. Overall then, fewer than 4% of American soldiers who received medical care died. That's unfortunate, of course, but still a pretty good record for any war. Remember, the nursing corps had to be set up immediately. It had to function quickly and efficiently right at the start in 1941 and 42. This, for an organization, the United States military, they really didn't quite know what to do with them, but realized, Eisenhower and MacArthur both realized, you simply must be able to care for the wounded effectively, and insisted that it be done efficiently. So organization, professionalism, and courage paid off for the Army Nurse Corps. There are 1,600 medals there. 201 nurses died as a result of the war. 13 air flight nurses were killed as a result of crashes. Overall, then, what we can say about the Army Nurse Corps and the women who served in it is they were soldiers too. They were warriors too, just like the men on the battlefield. But as you saw in the newsreel films, none of that was recognized at the time. And again, it's the title of our exhibit, We Didn't Do Anything, because that's what the culture said about these women. But in fact, without them, many, many, many men would have died, and others suffered terribly as a result of injuries. So tonight we commemorate them with this exhibit. As you walk down the hall here, this hall in back of you, all of the wartime posters, there are about a dozen of them, are on the walls. Take a look at them. They're really quite good. Then we have the nurse's prayer, and in the back of the atrium here is the exhibit itself, where we have running in sync the Defense Department's Army Nursing Training film from 1945. So it's broken down into boot camp, shipping out, and various theaters. There are other things that are back there that are worth seeing, so I invite you to take your time to visit the exhibit and read what we've put up there. It is unique. No one else in the United States has done this kind of an exhibit. And here in Muskegon at the Silversides Museum we have, and that's certainly a great thing. The museum commemorates and honors those veterans, and I hope you will find the exhibit one that enlightens you and inspires you. Thank you for your attention, and good evening.
I want to turn this over to my colleague because she is going to invite a couple of the special guests here tonight to do the ribbon cutting as we move down this hallway. So Peg, would you like to come forward and take over here?
I would like to ask our two honored guests tonight to please cut the ribbon and open the exhibit for all the rest of us.